You're watching the World Ethical Data Forum. My name is Luke Robert Mason, and I'll be moderating today's panel. Now, the Clubhouse is one of the fastest growing audio-only social networks, but one of the key ways it's been able to increase its user base is by blatantly violating users' privacy through accessing the address books on their phones. I can't overstate this enough. Do not grant Clubhouse access to your contacts. The average user only started to realize the extent of this problem when Clubhouse began to suggest users follow their exes, old acquaintances, bad dates, or even their drug dealers, the sorts of folks you wouldn't be connected with on social media, but whose details may exist archived on your phone. Today, we're joined by a privacy tech advisor, Deborah Farber, and CEO of ThinkPrivacy, Alexander Hampf, to discuss the extent to which Clubhouse's actions show that despite all of the virtue signaling by organizations like the Center for Humane Technology, big tech is still allowed to operate without accountability for its users' privacy. So, Alexander, you were one of the first people to highlight the issues related to Clubhouse in a LinkedIn article that went almost viral, and then you outlined some of their violations. So, can you just kind of give us an idea of what the extent of the problem is here?
First and foremost, a lot more than I wrote in the article. It got to the point where had I, written everything down, the article would have been a book. So I had to stop at some point. Basically, I summarized this on Twitter. All of the relevant articles of GDPR are completely failed to be met under their obligations in relation to Clubhouse. So we're not just talking about one or two violations. We're talking about literally the entirety of GDPR when it comes to the principles of GDPR, legal basis of processing of GDPR, data subject rights under GDPR, obligations for transparency and other obligations on a data controller, violations of the e-privacy directive as well. Confidentiality of communications, storing information on the user's terminal equipment, accessing location data. And the violations don't just exist for Clubhouse, they're encouraging their users to break the law as well. Under EU law, we have a case law from Belgium, where a company called TWO, if I remember correctly, TWOO, were issued a penalty for using a refer a friend system, where people were providing them with information about their friends in order to be marketed to. Just double check that I got the name of the company right. I don't want to get you in trouble, but I think that's the company. So basically, in these situations, we have an exemption in GDPR called the household activity. So generally, if you're doing something which is considered as a household activity, non-commercial, something between your family and friends, etc., is generally not considered as a violation of GDPR. But in this case, because Clubhouse is a commercial company in itself, the platform is a commercial platform. When users upload those address books to Clubhouse without the consent of every single person within that address book, they're actually in violation of GDPR as well. So as private individuals, this is one of the few circumstances under GDPR where you can be held liable for these activities. We're seeing this type of behavior from marketing departments as well, who are trying to reach out to their customers or engage their customers with clever audio platform stuff on Clubhouse. That is absolutely a commercial activity. So any companies who are using Clubhouse for this purpose are putting themselves at a very real risk of liability as well. Under European case law from the highest court, the Court of Justice of the European Union, the use of these types of platforms is covered under a case in relation to Facebook pages. It makes the users of these platforms for commercial benefit a joint controller and therefore having joint liability. And in this situation under EU law, us as a data subject can file a legal complaint against any or all controllers in these relationships. So you could file a complaint against Clubhouse, or you could file a complaint against the companies who are using Clubhouse. And for smaller companies, that could have a devastating impact on them if they receive enforcement action as a result. So it's really wholesale and complete holistic disregard of European data protection law, and obviously other laws around the world as well, particularly CCPA in California, for example.
Well, let's talk about some of those Californian laws, because obviously there's difference between how this will be handled in the EU and the US. And Deborah, I want to turn to you, because it feels like what's happening here is not just unlawful in the US, but really it feels unethical.
It does. You're right. I've been in privacy for 16 years. So before it was cool, right? Before people even knew it was a thing, a profession to even be in. Before there were privacy lawyers or privacy, engineers. Way before the privacy engineers. And these are the types of things we were talking about back when Facebook started. Back when, as a result of privacy transgressions, violations. The FTC regulated in the United States very often, and has issued 20-year consent decrees on some of the largest social media sites that that are still around today. And so what's fascinating to me, as you said, it almost seems unethical to use a business model of, fear, not fear, but FOMO, right? Like you're, afraid you might be left out. So it's only a select group of, small group of people who could, even give an invite to someone else to make it go viral, to make it feel like it's, it's an elite thing that you have to get an invite to. Now everybody wants it. Now there's, and using these tactics, it might have felt like, oh, this is great growth hacking, right? But and I think there's an over indexing on that in Silicon Valley, or just tech companies generally, is that you could use whatever you need to do to scale. It's all about scale, and not realizing that in today's regulatory landscape globally, you need, in order to have an MVP, like a minimum viable product that you could put in the ecosystem, which that's the parlance, right? MVP. You need to have privacy and security and arguably accessibility built into your app. Otherwise, you don't even meet the standards of what is an acceptable product in today's regulatory landscape. And so, what the Clubhouse team did here is they put their app, which was a good idea, but I would argue did not meet the minimum requirements of an MVP, and put their app in like a global, app store on iOS. And so, you are now liable for your product in whatever marketplace that you put your product in. And so, on one hand, I'm not surprised that they didn't have the rigor of what you would expect in the EU with GDPR and e-privacy and a whole host of other norms there, because it's just it seems like it was probably a blind spot. But how could the investors who've invested in all the social, Andreessen Horowitz specifically, I don't mean like your angel investors who maybe there was a crowd raise or something for funding, but I'm talking like Andreessen Horowitz, who gave them over $100 million at a $1 billion valuation for an idea that's not a fully fledged business. It makes you wonder, did they think, oh, there might be some privacy and security issues here, but let's quickly scale now, and we'll just like fix that later on, and then just like put a certain amount of money aside because, a big chunk of $1 billion, and you just have to throw away a few million to fix this, and kind of seeing that as just like, all right, well, there's an opportunity cost, but let's move forward. And the reason I would even say that that's something that's they're possibly doing is not only is that what it looks like from the outside to those who are paying attention, like Alexandra and myself, but they're not willing to engage with the public. So any engagement that the founders are having is on their own platform, Clubhouse, and they're not having conversations outside their own platform. They're not answering the call for private, they're not answering the call from privacy advocates and security advocates asking for more information. And even around security, instead, they're kind of trying to privacy wash by saying that their data protection is now being looked into, by only concentrating on the security aspects of data protection and completely ignoring the privacy aspects that are violating. I think that's a pretty long-winded answer to your question, but
But I figure in that case, if they can so blatantly ignore the journalists and the privacy advocates who've been looking into this, what can be done to draw attention? Because as Alex just said, we've seen this problem before, and the
Right.
German court has fined Facebook previously for the use of uploaded contacts in around 2016, and there's been rumblings that the Federation of German Consumer Organizations will basically go after Clubhouse and they'll face sanctions if they don't deal with this data privacy problem. But Alex, how hopeful are you that these sorts of actions will be successful?
I mean, there's a range of issues here. One of the ones which was just touched on by Deborah is the investors, the Horowitz investors. I've been in this space for a long time as well. I've been working in privacy for about 13, 14 years now. I was a computer scientist before that. And one of the things that I've noticed more and more often now are calls from investors and hedge funds doing due diligence on privacy and data protection for potential investments into new startups and tech companies. And I've seen a big increase in those types of calls over the past 2 years. But we're seeing these massive institutional investors still not taking any regard with these issues. Ethical investment is incredibly important, particularly in this day and age where we've seen the consequences of the bad use of data. The Cambridge Analytica situations, the Edward Snowden revelations. The stories are endless over the past 5 years or so. We've seen this over and over again. We also have a problem when it comes to a lack of enforcement of the law. So it's one thing in Europe, for example, having incredibly strong data protection and privacy laws, which we do, and we should be proud of that, but they're meaningless if they're not enforced. And we've seen a general lack of enforcement, which has led to this type of behavior because there's no incentive not to do so. There's nothing which is motivating companies to behave ethically and to process data in an ethical way. So it's not something new. It's not something which is going to be resolved in the near future either. But it takes a very fundamentally different approach to developing these platforms that we've seen. Privacy by design, not a new concept. It's been around for about 20 years now. But we're seeing this now incorporated into law. So data protection by design and default under Article 25 of the GDPR, the new e-privacy regulation has privacy by design and default, or may have. We don't know until it goes through trialogue, but currently it does. And we're seeing references to this type of design mechanism and the emergence of the privacy technologist moving into this space, but they're still not being utilized. And this is the problem. We have these concepts there. We have professionals who are ready to go into companies and do this work, but they're not being utilized, not being seen as necessary for these startups to be able to scale. So these privacy and data protection violations continue to occur. The solutions, or the solutions to the consequences of these violations, tend to get blue tacked on at the end, as opposed to being embedded in there at the very core and the very development of these systems. And I think Deborah was being a little bit generous when she said a blind spot. I don't think it's a blind spot. I don't think nowadays any company who's serious about technology cannot understand that there are risks in processing technology. It's in the news literally every single day. I think it's just a wanton lack of care in order to try and scale the company as quickly as possible and to dampen the consequences. And that's a big ethical issue, which is why it's really relevant to this particular forum. Yeah?
I mean, Deborah, the thing that sort of fascinates me is how consumers are so willing to ignore this issue. And I felt blindsided. I signed up to Clubhouse excitedly and signed up my contact list. And it wasn't until I started to see that it was suggesting people who I only knew because they were in my phone, did I start to realize that in actual fact something else might be going on here. Either this algorithm is incredible or they're sniffing through my contacts. And then when I wanted to delete my account, it feels like it's impossible to. I feel like I'm trapped on that platform now. And so many super users, so many influencers, they're quite happy to get their friends and their followers onto this platform instead of realizing there's a massive issue here and perhaps raising awareness of the problem. So what's happened to us as consumers that we're so willing to ignore these sorts of problems?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack here. So there I love social media. I'm just going to throw that out there to begin with. Like I love the concept of connecting with other people and having spaces to be able to, have quick conversations and share things with. So it's been really depressing to see the state of social media over the last 20, 25 years and how it's how it's risen like that. And I think there's a bunch of factors going on. For one, maybe we're used to giving concessions, right? Like, so Facebook will roll out a new feature. Maybe it feels a little invasive. They say, I'm sorry. They roll it back a little bit, but then we kind of use it because now the engagement on how privacy invasive we might have thought it was before they fixed it. Maybe we feel like it's a lot better now and safer, and they've just done some level of, I don't know, addressing the issue. Otherwise, regulators wouldn't let it be there, right? I think people are kind of well, it must be okay because this famous person's on Clubhouse, right? Oprah's on Clubhouse, or like so. I think we give a lot of our decision making when we don't know. We give it away to a third party who we trust when we don't know how to make a decision based on what's in front of us. And to be honest, most users of social media are not technically sophisticated. They don't necessarily follow privacy and security to the depth that we do here, even on this call right now. And I think there's just information asymmetry that, and combined with your leaders in whatever field or influencers, around the world are telling you like, hey, come find me on Clubhouse. And I have to say, what I feel most upset about, I'm trying to unpack my feelings here, so I don't want to be too polarizing, Alexander. But it's seeing so many privacy experts and so many security experts like flocking to Clubhouse to be influencers on privacy and security on Clubhouse, and so what I might jump into their feed or LinkedIn feed and be like, I'm confused why they think this is a good idea, right? When we should be standing up and going, this is not safe. The product is not currently safe. Let's make it safe. Once it's safe, let's go. Let's all go back to Clubhouse. But right now, it's not safe. That should be the message. And I do think that there are a lot of people falling down on their job right now as privacy and security professionals. Now, of course, they have their own opinions, and there are. I have heard some of the. I don't want to say excuses. In my opinion, it's an excuse. In theirs, it's a justification, right? So obviously, two sides to every story. But I honestly don't think that it's currently possible to make a change from inside the platform. It almost seems like being held hostage by terrorists, right? Like, oh, the only way as founders that you could talk to us is if you come on our privacy violating platform in the first place. Just doesn't seem like the right message to hit. And in fact, it undermines the very message we've been screaming for years, which is build privacy and security into your apps from the beginning, because it's right for the consumer. Of course, it follows human rights. Like in the EU, it's privacy is a human right. It's not so much perceived that way in the United States. It's more consumer it's regulated where it's perceived as unsafe and harming an individual. But either way, I think there is the security is lacking. That's proven. The privacy was not only not built by design, but it's privacy violating by design. So any attempt to later on go and like fix this issue is going to mean re-architecting the whole product. And so to move forward with a product that's unsafe, that's known to be unsafe in the marketplace, and then not to like take it down when you hear that like security researchers are finding how unsafe it is, and just keeping it in the marketplace to proliferate and continue to go viral, I think is incredibly unethical. And you're right. I think I'm not entirely sure of the nuances, but I would hope that the SEC, and I'm gonna, I don't know, use my voice to leverage it as much as I can, but that the SEC or whomever other regulators look at the investors, like hold them to due diligence requirements, and like if hold that there should be something criminal about knowingly putting an unsafe product into the marketplace. And I am not an expert in securities law by any means, so I can't really talk more about that. But it's an area that I expect to dive deeper into because it's not okay to put these apps out into the ecosystem. And that said, I do believe that the FTC and of course the other EU regulatory bodies, they're going to regulate, they're going to find them. It's going to happen. It's not an if, it's when. So there hasn't been a lot of news around Clubhouse and why perhaps it's going to fold as a business eventually. Perhaps the FTC might disgorge their profits made from these privacy violations, which is something that it has the ability to do. And it might actually step up and try to right the wrong to the consumer. So, it is unclear about how viable a business model they actually will have ultimately.
Well, it feels like ignorance isn't necessarily a good defense in this circumstance, and there are real risks here, aren't there? Because it's not just about the average consumer and how they're using the platform. There's questions of what if Clubhouse is asked to turn over the details of given individuals or political dissenters or folks that they may be connected to on the service, and that's where the problem of the lack of end-to-end corruption. End-to-end corruption. That was a Freudian slip. the lack of end-to-end encryption becomes a real problem, doesn't it, Alex?
This is the important thing, and this goes back again to what Deborah said about the platform being unsafe. Now, I'm a human rights advocate. I've been speaking on human rights all over the world for almost 15 years now, including in Beijing in China, speaking about privacy and freedom of speech. It's a dangerous world. And we know that the Clubhouse infrastructure is based in China. Anybody who is a professional in this space understands that China has laws that requires companies not just to cooperate with them in investigations, but to assist them. So they actually are required to provide information to the Chinese intelligence services as a matter of default. It's not something that they receive a court order for. They have a requirement to assist. Yeah, and going back again to what Deborah said with the privacy advocates or experts who are using this platform, they are followed by human rights advocates and people who work in this space. They're sharing their address books, which contain information about people who are working in this space, who would be considered at risk if they were to go into these environments, if they were to go to China or a Chinese-controlled territory, because they're considered as dissidents. So we're in a situation where we have privacy experts using this to decry their privacy failings, which is absurd anyway. But at the same time, putting people who follow them, who are motivated and mentored by these people to do their work in human rights and privacy, putting them at risk, because it's not just a case of Clubhouse can see who your contacts are when you put that up. They know who's referred who. They can track the location of those individuals. All this information, the audio recordings are stored in raw form on the servers in China, on the platform. So this information is available to a regime which we know has problems in relation to human rights. It's something which has been an international issue for many, many, many years. And we have a platform which is putting those people at risks. We have people who are supposed to be professionals and experts in this regime of human rights, putting those people at risk. And when we say putting people at risk, we're not just talking tinfoil hat stuff here. We're not talking about, spam and inconvenient messaging and things like that. We're talking about people's lives and freedoms, where people literally get disappeared into labor camps, etc. So this is something which is really very serious. And this is, my deepest concern is the fact that these issues exist and they're being ignored. I gave an interview to Wired magazine last weekend. I wrote a very lengthy response on these particular issues. There wasn't a single thing of it mentioned in the article on these risks to human life and human freedom. The same with Forbes. Forbes magazine did a piece on this as well. Again, there was very little in relation to what the actual risks are to people's lives and freedoms. And whereas we can say, it's just an audio app, it's just social media, it's not a problem. For some people, it is a real danger. And people's lives and people's families and friends and social graphs, because all of this stuff is available as information when you get access to these address books. So it's an incredibly dangerous It's not just unsafe, it's incredibly dangerous to be putting these people into those environments. And I can't, with any form of moral or ethical conscience, accept that as acceptable behavior, especially from people who should know better. It really upsets me to the point where I'm distraught that this is being ignored at this level. It's a very, very serious situation.
Well, it does feel like there's a wall of silence, and I sort of jokingly mentioned the Center for Humane Technology. I mean, the first thing I did, because of their popular Social Dilemma Netflix documentary, the first thing I did was go to their Twitter feeds and go to their website to see what they were doing. They've got the largest, or it seems like they've got the largest voice when it comes to the ethical use of technology, and they're busy on Twitter just promoting their podcast. And you're sitting there going, hold on, you guys are supposed to be there to raise attention to these sorts of things. And as you've said there, Alex, it feels like the investors, the founders, some of the super users, everybody just chooses to stay very silent. And some of the, Wired journalists or whoever it may be covering this story are, for some odd reason, trying to create this wall whereby they're not being held accountable in the way they should be. Because as a user, you do feel like you're now a prisoner inside of that platform. There's no easy way to delete your profile or your data from the service. So I guess, Deborah, what can a user do today to sort of draw attention and sort of, I just want to say escape, I guess, from an app like Clubhouse if they're already on it? Or is there absolutely nothing we can do? We're just helpless at the end of the day, despite all of the buzz around the ability to hold these companies accountable. The reality is, when it comes down to it, in actual fact, we have no power here.
I think I empathize with the feeling that it's like it's slow to actually get back, to reclaim your power, or to be able to feel like you can claw your data back, if at all, right? Because it just generally in today's data ecosystem, it feels like, we are the product for ads, we are right? Like, we're just being monetized. And, at first I want to say, if you live in a state that has a privacy law, California has CCPA, and Virginia now passed a law. Washington, I'm not sure if they just passed it, but they're working on it. We're going to see a proliferation of more state laws, and then eventually that'll be supplanted by a federal privacy law. I'm pretty certain then in the Biden administration that it's going to get done. I was pretty certain it wasn't going to get done under the Trump administration, and it didn't. So there's more enforcement coming, at least in the United States, through legislation that's requiring them, they have obligations already, that they need to be able to delete data when asked to delete it from the people who live in these states. One would think once you can allow that to be done from people in a certain state, you would just allow everybody in the country to have that same law, followed, so that you're not going, well, we don't believe people in New Jersey need this right, but we'll give it to people in, California. It just feels weird. So, companies tend to extrapolate that out to the other states, but it's apparent that they haven't built in a deletion capabilities, and they haven't built in the ability to, remove your data from their platform, or remove the shadow profiles they're creating from collecting all your contact lists. It's unclear what they're doing. They refuse to talk to the media about it. They refuse to talk to privacy advocates about it. I think they want to have a better story to tell. That, oh, look, here's what we did. But I think that they're absolutely losing trust with anybody in the privacy space that is following this, without, having good comms about what it is you've done wrong, what you're going to do to fix it. Now, I also want to give a little bit of hope, because I truly believe we are on the cusp of a privacy tech revolution. And I'm not just saying this because I'm an advisor for the Rise of Privacy Tech, which is kind of, in the Bay Area, where we're trying to bring investors, privacy technologists, founders, and advisors together, and, kind of enable that ecosystem. But the advent of like anti-facial recognition technology, of new decentralized business models, that's going to, I see what tech's getting funded right now, and I'm really, really excited. I know others can't see it yet. Alexandra, I'm curious on your thoughts on this, but I'm seeing that there is a rise right now of like, methods and tech and business models that are going to just completely upend this proliferation of data style of doing business, and old tired models that turn the individuals into the product as opposed to who we're serving on its head. So I really do think if you're not on that ethical side of treating people with respect when you build your products, threat model your products and see how they can be weaponized, and then, make modifications so that they can't be, coming up, like all of those things. If you're not on board with this new ethical tech wave, with all the call to action, not just regulatory, but from individuals who want their privacy right back, and from people who want ethical AI, and getting rid of biases. I mean, it's all coming to a head in just ethical tech. If you're not in that camp right now, I just don't see you having a long-term business model, and that includes big tech.
Well, Alexander, to Deborah's point there, I mean, it just feels like the carrot isn't tasty enough and the stick isn't hard enough. So, I mean, what can we do to ensure we don't see this BS in the future? How do we ensure that there's not a repeat of this sort of thing, just ad infinitum, and then the next platform has the same issues and the next platform has the same issues because they just realized, financially there's no disincentive or incentive for us to act in a legal and ethical way?
I mean, we are doing it, and I agree with what Deborah just said as well. I preach this, as the organ grinder pretty much every day. I was just teaching a class today for a professional certification for the IAPP, and had a very emotional and encouraging discussion with the participants on that course about how things are changing. You only need to look at companies like Apple and the stuff that they're doing, even Google and the stuff that they've announced in relation to getting rid of tracking cookies. Whether their alternative solution is going to be viable from a privacy perspective remains to be seen. But they've made it very clear that they're doing this because they see that there is no sustainable future for the mass harvesting and profiling of us based on our data. So we're starting to see changes, definitely. One of the biggest problems we have when it comes to startups, and I've worked with a lot of startups over the years, is a lack of funding. If you try and do things ethically, it's very difficult to get the level of funding you need to get your business off the ground. Another problem you have is, how do you market your product if you're not willing to use the marketing services which are responsible for violating the vast majority of these rights in the first place? It's very difficult to market yourself ethically in the current environment. LinkedIn is engaged in activities which I would argue don't comply with EU law. Facebook absolutely is engaged in activities which don't comply with EU law. Google, as we know, there are outstanding cases against all of these big tech companies who dominate the marketing landscape. So, we need to find alternative solutions. We need to find better investment. We need to find more ethical investment in order to grow this market of privacy enhancing technology, which is growing, and there's no question. And it's really nice to see that, something which really encourages me. Another thing I'd like to say, and you can take this as tongue-in-cheek as you want, but to Clubhouse, hire me. I'm really good at what I do. I know what your problems are. I can help you fix them. So if you genuinely want to launch a product which is going to be ethical and sustainable over the long term, reach out to the people who are highlighting what these risks and issues are, because I don't want to fight companies. I've been doing that for a long time. It's incredibly tiring. It doesn't really achieve anything. I'd rather work with companies in order to help them do things the right way, in order to develop, strong data ethics, make sure that they're able to produce products and services which empower rather than endanger society. Like Deborah, I love social media. I don't think people should have to be forced to stop using things like Facebook just because Facebook can't get their privacy obligations right. They should be forced to get those obligations right so the society can benefit from these tools and these technologies. Exclusion is not the answer. Inclusion is the answer. Get rid of this digital divide, make the world a smaller place, transcend prejudice and borders and all these other things. That's what I love about technology, is the ability to do that. But it has to be done right. And this exclusive nature where we say, well, if you don't want to use our platform and allow us to exploit your data and exploit your fundamental rights, then that's fine. Go off and be excluded from society. And that isn't the answer. Everybody should be able to use these safely and with their rights protected. That's why they're rights. Yeah, it's it's not an option. These are human rights that have been around for 60, 70 years now in many cases. So to see companies start to embrace that, start to look at things like, the impact this is going to have on their brand and their reputation, looking more long term. There's so much short term thinking about around the next quarter or the next month and how those metrics look for the marketing teams and the social media teams and so on and so forth. And it's absolutely useless from a business longevity perspective. You need to be looking at how you're going to sustain that business over the long term. And that means making very serious decisions to take into account these sweeping changes in the legislative landscape, which Deborah talked about, which is not going to go away. It's only going to increase, and making yourself more sustainable, making yourself more ethical. And I think another really promising thing here as well is the current generation, the millennials and beyond. They're really calling out for ethical business practices. It's not something which is optional anymore. If you want these people to work for you, if you want these people to use your products and services, then they want you to behave ethically. And that voice is getting stronger and stronger all the time. So I'm very positive. I think we're going in the right direction. I would rather we got there a little bit quicker. Yeah, but we're going in the right direction. And I have hope and faith that the world I want to see and the reason why I love technology will eventually arrive. Yeah.
Well, on that hopeful note, we should let Clubhouse know that both Deborah and Alex are available for hire, and that may be the thing that really changes this from the inside. And as always, the conversation continues, unfortunately, on social media, on the Twitter hashtag WEDF2021. You can follow all of our participants using the links provided in the digital program. My name is Luke Robert Mason, and on that note, I want to thank our incredible panelists for their wonderful contributions to today's discussion. So, Alex and Deborah, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. And lovely to see you again, Deborah.
Yeah, likewise. This has been fun.